The woman at the check-in desk looked at Saad Okonkwo the way people look at something they are certain is in the wrong place. Not rudely. Efficiently. The specific efficiency of a person who has managed a system for a long time and has developed, through that management, a set of assumptions about what belongs inside it and what has arrived by mistake. Miriam Cassidy was 56 years old. 14 years as regional director of the Southeastern High School Swimming Association. She looked at Saad, the worn racing suit in the discontinued colorway, the scratched competition goggles on a replacement strap from a hardware store, the hand-typed entry form, the absence of a coach lanyard, the absence of a team warm-up jacket, the absence of everything that said this athlete arrived from a program, and she said, with the specific courtesy of someone who considers what they are saying to be a kindness. Independent entries check in at the side desk. She said it at a volume that carried. The coaches from Meridian Aquatic Club and St. Catherine's Academy swim program, standing near the main check-in table with their lanyards and their clipboards and their matching team polo shirts, heard it. Some of them looked. A few of the elite swimmers in their team jackets heard it and looked at each other with the small shared expression of people who have just been given permission to form an opinion. Saad looked at Miriam Cassidy for a moment. Then she looked at the check-in form in her own hand. Then she said, "My entry form has the main desk reference number." Miriam took the form. She looked at it for 4 seconds. The reference number was correct. Everything on the form was correct. She handed it back. Side desk can still process you. A small, finished smile. It's easier over there. Saad held the form and did not move. "I'll check in here," she said. Nobody watching that exchange was going to forget it. Not because of what was said. Because of what Saada's face did, which was nothing. The absolute level composure of a girl who had spent 2 years training alone in a pool that was less than half the regulation length, who had driven 4 hours from Memphis to Nashville in her father's car with her entry form and her training log and her mother's discontinued competition suit in a drawstring bag, and who was not going to be redirected by efficiency. Nobody in that lobby knew what Saad Okonkwo was about to do to every record board in that building. To understand the afternoon that followed, you need to understand the two worlds that met inside the Whitfield Aquatic Center on that Tuesday in October. The first world. The Whitfield Aquatic Center, Nashville, Tennessee. A 50-meter Olympic standard pool with electronic timing pads. A digital scoreboard visible from every seat in the 1,200-capacity spectator gallery. And starting blocks with adjustable footrests and track start plates. The team preparation areas had folding chairs, power strips, and heat lamp towers for post-race recovery. The locker rooms had individual lockers with combination locks, not the push-button ones, the kind with personalized combinations. The concession stand sold branded sports drinks in the association's official colors. 14 elite swim programs competed in this regional championship. Their athletes arrived in matching team warm-up jackets, some of them the kind with individual names embroidered on the left chest. Their coaches had dedicated lanes in the warm-up pool. Their meet entries had been filed electronically through the association's platform 6 weeks in advance, reviewed, seeded, and confirmed. They had performance data from the current season feeding into a computer that generated heat assignments using an algorithm. This was the Southeastern High School Swimming Regional Championship, 41 years old, the most significant youth swimming competition in a 5-state region. It fed directly into the national junior pipeline. Scouts from 3 university athletic programs were in the gallery. The Second World. Mallory Recreation Center, Memphis, Tennessee. A 20-meter pool, not regulation, not even close to regulation. A compromise between the building's original function as a community gymnasium and the city's decision in 1994 to add a pool, with cracked tile grout on the east wall, 1 working lane divider, and a shared schedule that gave competitive swimmers access from 6 to 8 in the morning before the adult lap swimmers arrived, and from 9 to 10 at night after the water aerobics class finished. There was no starting block. There was a painted yellow line on the wall at water level that someone had added at some point to approximate the regulation measurement. The timing was manual, a coach with a stopwatch, except Jefferson Preparatory Magnet School in Memphis had no swim coach and no swim program and no stopwatch, So for 2 years Saad Okonkwo had timed herself using a waterproof sports watch with a bezel scratch across the face that made the second hand slightly hard to read. Those were the two worlds. One of them had produced every finalist in this regional championship for 37 of its 41 years. The other had produced one girl alone, with a drawstring bag and a hand-typed entry form and a training log written in her dead mother's handwriting. Saad Okonkwo was 16 years old. 5 feet 7. The first thing you noticed was not her height. It was how still she became at the water's edge. Not the still of someone waiting. The still of someone reading. She would stand at the end of a lane and look at the water the way her mother had taught her. Not at the surface, through it, to the bottom line, the specific geometry of depth and distance that tells you something about how a pool moves. Her mother had told her once that every pool has a personality. You learn the personality before you get in. Her mother had learned this from watching. From standing at the edges of pools, she was not always permitted to enter on the same terms as the other girls. From a lifetime of learning the thing you love in the spaces left over after everyone else had taken what they needed. Pauline Okonkwo had been state-ranked in the 200-meter freestyle at 17. She had trained through high school at a community center in Memphis with a program that operated on a budget that wouldn't have covered 1 month of equipment for Meridian Aquatic Club. She had been fast enough to matter. She had submitted her entry for the regional championship in the fall of 1994 and been told, by phone, that the registration window had closed. It had not closed. She found this out 11 years later in a conversation that was about something else, and she had held the information the way you hold something that can no longer be used, which is carefully and without display. Pauline died of cervical cancer 3 years ago, in the spring, in a hospital room in Memphis with Saad and Sada's father Vincent beside her. She was 41 years old. She had spent the last year of her life writing a training log for her daughter. Not a memory book, not letters, a serious technical document, 112 pages of handwritten training progressions, stroke mechanics, turn technique, mental preparation, race strategy, split time targets. The kind of document that a professional coaching staff would have charged a significant amount of money to produce. Pauline had produced it at a kitchen table in Memphis between her second and third rounds of treatment, in the mornings when she felt well enough to sit up. Saad kept the training log in the outside pocket of her drawstring bag. She had read it so many times the spine had separated and been repaired with clear packing tape. On the inside front cover, her mother's handwriting. The pool doesn't know what they told you. It only knows what you do. Vincent Okonkwo was 44 years old. He worked facilities maintenance at Mallory Recreation Center, the same building where Saad trained every morning. He had arranged, through his supervisor, for Saad to have early access to the pool before his shift started. He had paid the $70 entry fee for the regional championship from his third paycheck in September. He had not told Saad where the money came from until she asked, directly, after the entry was confirmed. He had driven her to Nashville that morning in his 2009 Civic with the rear window that didn't close all the way above 40 miles per hour. And he had dropped her at the entrance and gone to park because there was a $20 parking fee and he wanted to walk from the street lot 2 blocks over. He was in the gallery now, 3rd row from the top, still in his work shirt because he had come straight from his morning shift. He had a program open in his lap. He was looking at the heat sheets. Miriam Cassidy had run this regional championship since she was 42 years old, appointed by the association board after 12 years as a club coach and 4 years as assistant regional director. She was organized, thorough, and genuinely invested in the quality of this competition. That investment was real. What was also real, and what she had never examined with the same rigor she applied to her timekeeping systems, was the set of assumptions embedded in the way the competition functioned. Which programs received early entry confirmation, which athletes received equipment guidance, which eligibility questions were resolved in favor of the athlete and which were escalated to formal challenge. These decisions, made across 14 years, had accumulated into a pattern that Miriam Cassidy had never laid out flat and looked at directly because she had never been asked to, and because no one she had excluded had ever been powerful enough to make the asking necessary. Her authority was institutional and total. She controlled the seedings. She controlled the lane assignments. She controlled the equipment validation process. She was simultaneously the person who set the rules of entry and the person who adjudicated disputes about those rules. Nobody had ever questioned this arrangement in 14 years because Miriam had spent 14 years ensuring that nobody with a standing to question it ever had a sufficient reason. Gerald Fitch was 71 years old. He had swum competitively for 14 years at the national and international level, worked 12 years as a FINA technical official, and had been invited as honorary head judge to this regional championship on the strength of a career that had taken him to 4 Olympic Games in an officiating capacity. He was sitting in the officials' area with a program and a cup of coffee, and the specific alertness of a man who has spent decades watching water and knows that the thing worth watching is rarely what everyone else is watching. The heat sheets posted at 8:15 that Tuesday morning placed Saad Okonkwo in Heat 1 of 8 heats in the 200-meter freestyle. Heat 1 was the slowest heat. The seed times of the athletes placed there made the category plain. It was known, without being said aloud in any official document, as the qualifiers heat. The heat where independent entries and late additions and athletes from programs without historical standing in the association swam their times and went home. In 41 years of this championship, no athlete seeded in Heat 1 had ever qualified for the final 8. Saad checked the heat sheet at the side desk where she had eventually been directed to complete her check-in processing. She found her name. Heat 1, Lane 8. She wrote the seed time in the training log, her mother's column for target comparison time, and closed the notebook. She said nothing. At 9:43 in the morning, Saad Okonkwo stepped onto the starting block in Lane 8 of Heat 1 of the 200-meter freestyle. She stood at the block the way her mother had described standing at a block. Feet flat, completely still, not performing readiness but actually ready, which are not the same physical state, and any experienced official can tell the difference between them. She put on the scratched goggles with the hardware store replacement strap. She looked at the water. She did what her mother had described in the training log on page 31. She read the lane. The specific geometry of 20 meters from the far wall, the slight variation in the lane divider tension on her right, the quality of the starting block's grip plate under her feet. Then she reached into the drawstring bag beside the block, an action nobody on the deck questioned because athletes reached into bags before races, and she took out the training log. She did not open it. She held it against her chest with both hands for 4 seconds. Then she put it back. She had read it so many times she did not need to open it. But she needed to hold it. There is a difference, and her mother had taught her that the difference was not superstition but preparation. The specific act of touching the source of something before you perform it, the way musicians touch the instrument before the first note. The starter's signal came. The time on the board when she touched the pad at 200 meters was 1 minute 53.4 seconds. The qualifying time for the final 8 was 1 minute 54.1. The Meridian Aquatic Club coach, standing behind the lane dividers with a stopwatch, looked at his stopwatch. Then at the board. He looked at the board for 3 seconds. Then he looked at the girl in Lane 8 climbing out of the pool. In the gallery, heat sheets rustled. People who had not been watching Heat 1 were now looking at the board. In the officials' area, Gerald Fitch set down his coffee. In the director's table, Miriam Cassidy looked at the electronic timing readout. She looked at it for a long time without expression. Then she picked up her clipboard. There were 7 more heats to run. The fastest time from each heat would advance to the final 8. When all 8 heats were complete, the time board showed the final heat lineup. Saad Okonkwo's name was 4th. Saad was in the team preparation area, the public row of chairs along the far wall, not the private tent area where the academy programs had their setups, when Miriam Cassidy walked toward her at 11:47. Not toward her exactly. Toward the officiating table adjacent to the preparation area, where Cassidy spoke for several minutes with the equipment validation officer. Then the equipment validation officer walked to Saad. The officer was a woman named Sandra, mid-30s, who had been doing equipment validation for this championship for 4 years, and who had the expression of someone performing a task she had been instructed to perform and has some reservations about. "Can I look at your competition suit?" Sandra asked. "Yes," Saad said. Sandra examined the suit. She turned it to the back panel. She looked for the certification mark that had been required under the new equipment standard passed by the Regional Association 18 months ago. The mark was absent. The suit had been manufactured before the standards passage. It predated the requirement. Sandra wrote something on her clipboard. She looked at Saad with the expression of someone delivering news they did not originate. Your suit doesn't carry the new performance certification mark. Director Cassidy is filing an equipment challenge. You'll need to come to the officials' table. The officials' table was at the end of the pool deck near the gallery entrance. When Saad arrived at the table, Miriam Cassidy was there. 2 association officials were there. A small group of coaches from the competing elite programs had gathered at a distance that was close enough to watch. Gerald Fitch was also there. He had not been summoned. He had walked from the officials' area on his own. He stood with his arms folded and said nothing initially, listening. Miriam Cassidy presented the equipment challenge formally. The suit did not carry the required certification mark. The regulation was clear. Saad Okonkwo should be withdrawn from the final. The 2 association officials looked at each other. Gerald Fitch said, "May I see the regulation text?" Miriam produced the document. Gerald read it. He read it twice. He read the specific passage about the effective date of the requirement and the applicability to equipment manufactured prior to that date. He set the document on the table. The regulation applies to suits manufactured after the date of the ruling, he said. Suits manufactured prior are grandfathered under the equipment standards in effect at the time of manufacture. This suit is 3 years old. The manufacturer's date code is on the interior label. He had checked it when Sandra had shown him the suit. The challenge doesn't hold. Miriam Cassidy was quiet for a moment. The spirit of the regulation. The regulation is the text, Gerald said. He said it without sharpness. As a fact, the challenge is dismissed. He looked at Miriam Cassidy with the specific attention of a man who has spent decades watching systems operate and has a very accurate sense of when a system is functioning as designed and when it is functioning as someone's preference. Then he said quietly, so that only Miriam and the 2 officials heard, "I'd like to review the equipment challenge records from the last 14 years. All of them. After the final." Miriam looked at him. "Of course," she said. At 1:58 in the afternoon, Saad Okonkwo stood at the block in lane 4 of the final of the 200-meter freestyle at the Southeastern High School Swimming Regional Championship. The gallery held 1,100 people. It was not full, but it was full enough. The morning's heat results had been posted on the association's live timing website and had been shared, the way unexpected results tend to be shared, across the community of people who follow competitive swimming in the region. The gallery had accumulated through the afternoon with people who had seen the time and come to see whether the girl who had posted it was real. Coaches from Meridian and St. Catherine's were on the deck. Their athletes were in the final. 5 of the 8 finalists were from those 2 programs. The athletes in their matching suits and their team warm-ups stood at their blocks. They had warmed up in the warm-up pool, coached, prepared, taped. Saad stood at lane 4 in the worn suit that had just been the subject of a formal challenge. She had the drawstring bag beside the block. She did not reach into it. She had reached into it in the preparation area 20 minutes ago, and she had held the training log for 4 seconds, and she had put it back. She did not need to hold it again. The 4 seconds had been enough. She reached into the inside pocket of her warm-up jacket instead. She took out a photograph. It was small, wallet-sized, worn at the edges, the protective film peeling at one corner. A girl at 17, standing at the edge of a pool, in a competition suit, looking at the camera with an expression that was not a smile exactly, but was something adjacent to it. The specific expression of someone who has not yet learned what they will later lose. Saad looked at the photograph for one breath. She put it back in the pocket. She took off the warm-up jacket and folded it precisely on top of the drawstring bag. She put on the scratched goggles. She stepped onto the block. In the 3rd row from the top of the gallery, Vincent Okonkwo set down the program he had been holding for 3 hours. He put both hands on the railing in front of him. He looked at the block where his daughter was standing. He was still in his work shirt, the one with the Mallory Recreation Center logo on the left chest, faded from washing to a color that was almost the original blue but not quite. The starter called the athletes to their marks. All 8 finalists stepped to the edge of the blocks. The gallery went quiet in the specific way that a crowd of people go quiet when they understand that what they are about to see is something they drove here to see. Not planned quiet. Arrived at quiet. The signal came. There is a version of telling this race that uses split times and stroke rates and technical analysis of turn efficiency. That version is accurate but incomplete. What happened in the next 1 minute and 52.8 seconds was visible to everyone in the gallery and to the 11 coaches on deck and to the 2 university scouts in the upper tier and to Gerald Fitch at the officials table and to Miriam Cassidy at the directors table. And all of them would describe it differently, but none of them would describe it inaccurately, because what they were watching was the same thing seen from different angles. What they were watching was a girl who had trained alone for 2 years in a 20-meter pool that was less than half the length of the water she was currently moving through, and who was moving through it with a specific unhurried efficiency of someone for whom the distance had always been internal rather than external. Her turn at the 100-meter wall was technically clean. Not flashy, not the kind of turn that drew attention, the kind that lost nothing. Her stroke in the final 50 meters was the same stroke as the first 50 meters, which is either a statement about conditioning or a statement about the quality of what she had been taught, and in this case it was both. Lane 4 finished first. The time board posted 1 minute 52.8 seconds. It was a new regional record by 1.3 seconds. The gallery did not react immediately. A full 3 seconds of quiet. The specific human pause that happens when something occurs that the brain has to cross-reference against its existing understanding of what is possible before it can produce a response. Then the response came. In the 3rd row from the top, Vincent Okonkwo stood up. He did not make a sound initially. He stood up straight and looked at the pool and pressed his lips together the way people press their lips together when the alternative is something they are not ready for the room to see. Then he sat back down and put his face in his hands. He did not cry loudly. He was not a man who cried loudly. He cried the way people cry when they have been holding something for 3 years and the thing they have been holding was heavier than they had allowed themselves to fully acknowledge, and the weight has just been set down. On the pool deck, Saad had surfaced and pushed the goggles up. She looked at the time board. She read her time. She looked at it for a long moment without expression. Then she looked up at the gallery. Not at any specific section, just up, the way you look upward when you want to be visible to someone who isn't present in the specific located way of someone with a seat, and her expression did something that the rest of the day had not produced in it. It was brief. A single thing moving across her face and then resolving back into composure. But it was visible to people who were paying attention, and several people were. Then she pulled herself out of the pool and walked to the timing pad and shook hands with the second-place finisher, a 17-year-old from Meridian who had just had the best performance of her competitive career and had finished second by 1.2 seconds, and who would later tell her coach that the girl in lane 4 had a stroke she had never seen in a high school swimmer. She said this as a compliment. She meant it as one. Gerald Fitch found Saad at the team preparation area at 3:41 in the afternoon. She was sitting in one of the public chairs with the training log open in her lap, not reading it, looking at it, the way you look at something that contains more than it shows on any single page. He sat down in the chair beside her. He looked at the notebook without commenting on it. He said, "I've started reviewing the challenge records." Saad looked at him. 14 years, he said. 19 formal equipment challenges. All of them filed against independent entries or athletes from programs outside the association's established membership. 12 of them in the 200 and 400 freestyle events specifically. He paused. None against an established academy program. Not once in 14 years. Saad was quiet. "The pattern is very clear in the records," he said. "It will be reported to the regional governing board and to the National Association. There will be a full review of the directorship. That process will take several months and I cannot tell you its outcome, but I can tell you that a pattern of this clarity, documented across 14 years, does not typically resolve quietly." Saad looked at the training log in her lap. "My mother tried to qualify for this meet," she said. "When she was 17. She was told registration had closed. It hadn't. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Did she know that at the time? She found out later. She didn't do anything about it. She said she didn't know she was allowed to. He looked at her. You're allowed to. I know, she said. She looked at the training log. She ran her thumb along the repaired spine, the clear packing tape that had held it together since the binding gave out in August. She wrote all of this, Sod said. Not to him specifically. To the fact of it. I know, he said. He had understood what the notebook was since the moment he saw her hold it at the block. He stood. He reached into his jacket and took out a card. Not a business card. A plain white card with a name and a phone number written in pen. Slightly formal, the way certain people of a certain generation write contact information. He placed it on the notebook. The National Junior Development Program has a selection process that begins in February. Your time today automatically qualifies you for consideration. I am on the selection committee. He looked at her with the direct, unhurried attention of a man who has spent his career making accurate assessments. I believe the committee will find your application straightforward. He left in the direction of the officials' area. Sod looked at the card on the notebook. Then she opened the notebook to the last blank page at the back. She wrote one line. She did not write it for anyone to read. She wrote it because the blank page was there and the thing needed to be placed somewhere outside herself. She closed the notebook. Vincent Okonkwo found her at 4:15. He was still in the work shirt. He sat down in the chair beside her, not Gerald Fitch's chair, the one beside it, and he looked at her and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a while because the things that needed saying were already known to both of them and the sitting was sufficient. The record board has your name on it, he said finally. I know, she said. Permanent. The physical one on the wall. She nodded. He looked at his hands. He was holding the program from the morning, folded and refolded through the course of the day until it had taken on the same quality as the entry confirmation form in her bag, softened at its creases, worn by handling. She would have been watching the whole time, he said. From the qualifying heat. I know that too, Sod said. He nodded. He did not say anything else about it. He picked up the drawstring bag. He handed it to her. She put the training log in the outside pocket. They walked out through the gallery entrance together, past the 1,200 seats and the digital scoreboard still showing the final results, and the trophy table where a championship medal on a ribbon had been placed in a small case. She was wearing the medal. She had not looked at it since it was placed around her neck. She was aware of it the way you are aware of something physical that represents something else, which is to say continuously and slightly separately from the thing itself. At the exit, she stopped. She reached into the pocket of the warm-up jacket, the inside pocket, where the photograph had been. She took it out. She looked at it for a moment. A girl at 17, at the edge of a pool she never got to race in, with an expression that was not a smile but was something adjacent to it. Sod put the photograph back in the pocket, against her chest, where it had been all day. They walked out into the late afternoon. The things that moved in institutions moved at the speed of institutions, and the things that moved everywhere else moved faster, which is the rhythm that matters in this story. Gerald Fitch submitted his preliminary findings to the Regional Governing Board within 72 hours of the championship. The board opened a formal review of the Southeastern High School Swimming Association's directorship and its equipment challenge procedures. The review was not completed quickly. Miriam Cassidy submitted her resignation from the directorship 4 months later. She had held the position for 14 years. She resigned in a letter of 2 paragraphs that expressed gratitude for the opportunity and offered no explanation. The resignation was noted in the association's annual report. It would be there every year after. Records stay. She was not ruined. She had a life and a career history and knowledge of a sport she genuinely loved and had genuinely served, in all the ways that a person can serve something while simultaneously bending it toward their own preferences without acknowledging the bending. She had never thought of herself as the kind of person who would do what the records showed she had done for 14 years. That distance, between who she believed she was and what the documents demonstrated, was hers to close, and it was not a small distance, And this story does not tell you whether she closed it. Only that the records exist and will continue to exist, and that existence is a form of accountability that does not require anyone's cooperation. 3 months after the regional championship, the association formally reviewed all 19 equipment challenges in the historical record. 14 were reclassified as having been incorrectly upheld. 6 athletes who had been disqualified from previous championships under those challenges were offered formal letters of correction. The letters were not retroactive in any meaningful practical sense. The races had happened, the results had stood, the years had passed. But they were letters. They were on the record now. The record is where certain truths wait, quietly, for someone to look. In February, Saad Okonkwo submitted her application to the National Junior Development Program. She included her regional championship time, the equipment challenge documentation and its resolution, and the training log, not the original, a full photographic copy she had made at the library in Memphis, page by page, careful with the spine. The cover letter she wrote was 2 paragraphs and described, without flourish, the 20-meter pool at Mallory Recreation Center and the program written for her by a woman who had studied the sport for 24 years and never been permitted to compete at the level for which she was qualified. The selection committee met in March. Gerald Fitch was on the committee. He did not need to advocate. The application was sufficient. In April, Saad was admitted to the National Junior Development Program on a full scholarship. The program included access to a 50-meter training facility, coaching staff, and competition entry fees for the national junior circuit. It also included a stipend for equipment. She bought a new suit. She kept the old one. Jefferson Preparatory Magnet School in Memphis received a letter from the Regional Association in June informing them that based on their athletes' performance at the regional championship, the school was eligible for entry into the association's member program, which would provide access to the association's equipment loan program and eligibility for the full championship series. The school did not have a swim program. The letter prompted a conversation with the city's Parks and Recreation Department about the Mallory Recreation Center pool. Whether that conversation produced anything concrete was a question still being discussed at the time this story ends. Conversations of that kind move at the speed of municipal budget cycles, which is slower than a regional championship and slower than a new record on a permanent wall, but when they move they tend to produce things that last longer than either. 6 months after the championship, Saad walked into a regional invitational at a facility in Atlanta. She was the youngest swimmer on the roster, the lowest seed. A woman in the gallery, not seeing who was close enough to hear, said quietly to the person beside her, pointing at the heat sheet, "That program doesn't have a pool." Saad was already at the warm-up pool when this was said. She did not hear it. She stood at the edge of the water and looked at it, threw it to the bottom line, the way her mother had taught her. Every pool has a personality. You learn the personality before you get in. She reached into the drawstring bag. She took out the training log. She held it against her chest with both hands. 4 seconds. She put it back. Then she took out the photograph. She looked at it for 1 breath. She put it back in the inside pocket of her warm-up jacket. She reached into the bag one more time and took out something small. An index card. On one side, her mother's handwriting, transferred from the inside front cover of the original notebook. The pool doesn't know what they told you. It only knows what you do. She looked at it for a moment. Then she pressed it flat against the timing pad at the edge of the water. Not so she could read it, beside her hand, the way you place something next to you when you want company. She put on the scratched goggles. The new ones were in the bag. She was not ready to use them yet. She got in. Pauline Okonkwo never stood on a regional championship block. She spent her life learning everything about a sport in the spaces left over after everyone else had taken what they needed, and she prepared the next person with every year of that knowledge, at a kitchen table, in a notebook that held together with packing tape, in a training plan so precise and so serious that a selection committee reading it in March would recognize in it the work of someone who understood the sport at the level of its deepest requirements. Nobody invited her into those rooms. She stood at the edges of pools and learned them anyway. She prepared the next person anyway. The world is full of Pauline Okonkwos, women and men and children who are brilliant and thorough and told by the systems around them that the door is not for them, and who spend their lives building something in the space beyond the door so that the next person arrives already prepared. The question was never whether they had something worth offering. The question was who was standing at the gate, and when we finally decide that the gate doesn't need a keeper. Saad Okonkwo answered that question on a Tuesday afternoon in Nashville with a worn suit and a record board and a photograph in an inside pocket. The pool didn't know what they told her. It never does. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Noir Resurgence. Every week we find the stories the world almost missed. People who built something real in the dark, with no audience, because the work itself was the point. You don't want to miss what they do next. Leave one word in the comments that describes Saad. Just one. That's enough.